Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on this Monday morning for this emergency press conference regarding Medicare for All. My name is James Moore. I'm with the Durham DSA and the North Carolina Medicare for All Coalition. And we are here to call this press conference to declare a state of emergency. It's been nearly a year since the COVID-19 pandemic arrived in force in the United States. Since then, over 15 million people have contracted the virus, many with severe and chronic health effects, and a disproportionate amount of infections affecting the Black community, the Latinx community, and all those who have been forced to work low-wage and essential jobs throughout this pandemic. Tens of millions of people have lost their jobs, tens of millions of people have lost their employer-based health insurance, and most significantly, over 280,000 people have lost their lives. In this context, I must admit that it's a little strange to celebrate a holiday named Human Rights Day, amidst a historical moment where the inherent value of human life has never felt so cheap. I must admit that it feels strange to celebrate a day that, as you can see on this poster, is meant to affirm every human being's right to material things like housing, like food, like healthcare, when so many of us are homeless, when so many of us go hungry, and so many of us cannot afford the healthcare that we need. This is why we're here, to call attention to the emergency that our human rights are being actively denied. When you lose your home, that is an emergency. When you can't feed yourself or your family, that is an emergency. When you become sick or injured and you cannot afford the health care that you need, especially in the middle of a pandemic, that is an emergency. And as we speak, despite the relative calmness of the legislative building behind us, millions and millions of people are having to endure these emergencies alone simply because they cannot afford the rights that they're supposed to be entitled to as human beings. But it doesn't have to be this way. A better world is possible. And that is why we of the North Carolina Medicare for All Coalition are not just here simply to declare that healthcare is a human right, but to declare that the only way to ensure that each person in this country's right to healthcare is guaranteed is to do what most industrialized countries do already. And that is to take healthcare outside the control of the private sector. The only way to ensure this, to ensure that healthcare is seen as a human right, is to pass Medicare for All. Medicare for All is a single-payer insurance program administered by the federal government that will cover all United States residents. Under Medicare for All medical services that require a medical professional will be free at the point of service, including dental, vision, mental health, and pharmaceuticals. Under Medicare for All, instead of having to continue to pay the rising costs of premiums, co-pays, and deductibles, instead of having to depend on your employer for a health insurance plan that limits what doctors you can see and what type of care you can receive, you, your family, even people you don't even know, will be able to receive the health care they need from the provider they want to receive it from without having to worry about not being able to afford it, without having to choose between a death sentence and a death sentence. Medicare for All will not solve housing or food injustice or affirm any of the other rights on this poster board. Only the decommodification of these material items will. But until then, without the burden of premiums, co-pays, and deductibles, Medicare for All will make these essential items easier for people to attain. Medicare for All will not solve racial or gender-based injustice, but by providing universal health care that's free at the point of service, by reallocating funds to underfunded hospitals and marginalized communities, it will go a long, long way towards ameliorating the hard edges of our society that cut out Black women, the Black community, the Latinx community, the indigenous community, and the LGBTQ community. The fact that Medicare for All isn't already a reality, the fact that our human right to healthcare is being actively denied by the profit motive of the private sector is an emergency we cannot let stand, and it is an emergency we cannot solve individually. That is why, although this is a press conference, our intended audience here isn't the press or even necessarily our elected officials. It is to the people across the state who feel the same way that we do. The private healthcare industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Health insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, and all those whose wealth is predicated on commodifying our right to healthcare are doing everything they can to deny us Medicare for All through media propaganda and buying off politicians. Our side may not have the money, we may not have the same degree of insider influence, but what we do have is the people. The North Carolina Medicare for All Coalition is a coalition of grassroots organizations from across the state, some of which you'll hear from today, and it has come together to build the only thing that can defeat the corporate coalition that has formed to keep the healthcare status quo in place. And that is a working class, multiracial, multi-faith, multi-generational movement for Medicare for All. But we need your help. If you are a believer in Medicare for All, if you are a believer in healthcare as a human right, come join us by visiting www.ncm4a.org. That's www.ncm4a.org, and join us in this fight. There's no time to lose. Just yesterday, nearly 3,000 people across this country died from COVID-19, roughly the same amount of people who died on 9/11. But instead of turning against people who aren't like us, instead of launching an imperialist wars that kill millions of people and immiserate and destabilize whole entire regions of the world, let us turn towards each other. Let us fight for people who we don't know, and let us continue to fight to ensure that our right to health care, our right to housing, our right to food, our right to labor rights, our right to live full and dignified lives as human beings is no longer denied. Again, please visit www.ncm4a.org to learn more.